Was this the right move, or is this part of a witch hunt?
Well, I respect the move, but the entire thing has been a witch hunt, and there is no collusion between certainly myself and my campaign, but I can always speak for myself and the Russians, zero. I think it divides the country. I think we have a very divided country because of that and many other things. So I can tell you that we want to bring this great country of ours together. Believe me, there's no collusion. Russia is fine, but whether it's Russia or anybody else, my total priority, believe me, is the United States of America. There was no collusion, and everybody, even my enemies, have said there is no collusion.
Hey, welcome back to Morning Joe. It is Friday, May 19th. Mika's morning off. Where's Mika again, Willie?
South of France, as far as I know. Yeah,
it's where she's
usually.
Always.
Yeah.
Who do we have with us today?
Well, still with us, Joe. Pulitzer Prize-winning associate editor of the Washington Post, Bob Woodward, New York Times reporter Michael Schmidt, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist and associate editor of the Washington Post, Eugene Robinson, and joining the conversation there with you in D.C., senior politics reporter at USA Today, Heidi Prisbilla. Should we jump right into it here, Joe?
Well, I'm just kind of curious. Heidi, did you say the name right?
Actually, I did.
Yeah. It was not the Chris Matthews. Heidi Prisbilla.
We're not going to get to the Polish version, but you're all saying it right in American.
What is the Polish version?
The PRZ is like a psh sound. In Polish. Shibilla.
I still haven't figured out how to say Zbigniew. Really quickly, before we get to the news, I'm stunningly superficial this way. Before we get to the news, Willie, I just want to turn to Bob, following up on the Michael Isikoff story about Stay Strong. You said there were echoes. There were echoes of a certain message that Richard Nixon sent to John Mitchell.
Yeah, to John Dean.
Oh, John Dean.
In the middle of the cover-up, Nixon said to Dean, "Good job, John." And it's Dean interpreted it rightly is, stay on the reservation. Now, it's unfair to say this is what's going on in this case, but again, it's where is the mute button on Donald Trump?
Well,
who can find it? Because whatever the intent is, it sends that message of, oh yeah, we're part of not coming clean on this.
Right. Well, Gene, it may be unfair to draw any conclusions from him saying stay strong, but it's not inappropriate to say that was wildly out of line, wildly inappropriate. Well, if there are ever criminal investigations, that will be an exhibit.
Exactly.
That will be a line of questions. That will be something that a jury will look into to say, was Donald Trump trying to influence a juror? And what other evidence do we have of that?
Look, there's all this behavior that looked very much like a cover-up. Now, so how do you expect that people won't try to find out if there's something in the middle that's being covered up? I mean, that's just the situation, and he keeps doing it.
Joe, as someone who covered the Hillary campaign, or who covered the campaign at all, I find it highly unlikely that Donald Trump didn't know that that type of interaction with a law enforcement official during an active investigation was highly inappropriate, given the outroar that there was over Bill Clinton simply talking to Loretta Lynch on the tarmac. So it's a question also of how much of this he knew what he was doing was wrong. And another thing I want to mention, Joe, and I looked at, I don't know if this has been mentioned yet, but I went back and looked at the timeline last night. So after Trump was pressuring Comey in this way, it was only a week or two that you saw some of those committee chairs, like Chairman Burr, somewhat, in some people's views, inappropriately speak out and try to poo-poo the connections between the White House and Russia. So there's also evidence that there was a broader campaign going on here to try and squelch this from going forward by also starting to pressure members on the Hill. Perhaps it was in coordination. Perhaps it was because he couldn't get Comey to do what he wanted.
Right, and we'd heard, obviously, people on the Hill getting phone calls from the White House saying, hey, you need to go out and echo our line that there's nothing here to the collusion charges. But let's talk about the James Comey phone call and your story, which we're going to get to in 1 second. But let's just talk really briefly about the phone call that Heidi brings up, where he summoned off a helicopter for an urgent phone call with the president.
Look, Comey had rarely received a call from Obama and hadn't talked to Trump much, and Comey's about to get on this helicopter and say the White House is on the phone, and he thinks it's an urgent national security matter, so he gets on the phone, and he's sitting in his SUV as the helicopter is waiting for him, and the president wanted to chit-chat. And for Comey, who's obsessive about his independence, perhaps too much, some people think, maybe too far, he says, well, why is he doing this? He's asked me for my loyalty. He's asked me to look past the Flynn investigation, and now he's calling to chit-chat. I don't want to be his friend.
Right.
This is not appropriate.
It certainly really has echoes of Bill Clinton sauntering onto Loretta Lynch's jet and sitting there and deciding that might be a good time to talk about golf and grandkids in the middle of an investigation into Hillary Clinton.
You know, Joe, I'm listening to Michael describe that phone call, and as you can appreciate, that just sounds like the Donald Trump a lot of people have known for so long, which is that he picks up the phone and he calls people to touch base. Sometimes he's got an agenda, sometimes he just wants to talk. And I think it's another case of a man who's spent his life in the private sector, a man who's been a CEO, a man who's lived in the New York tabloids, calling around, controlling a message, being educated in what it means to be president of the United States and how different it is. And he needs to have some guardrails. He needs to have somebody, to your point before, next to him who has that mute button, as Bob Woodward put it, or somebody who can tell him what the rules are now that you're president for 4 months.
And Willie, there are guidelines, and we're showing them up on the screen right now, guidelines that prohibit that sort of contact. And as Michael Schmidt's article in the New York Times reveals today, Comey had already told Trump, if you want to talk to me, if you want to talk about the investigation, go through proper channels. This is a guy, again, who wouldn't even play basketball with Barack Obama at that president's invitation, despite having great respect for the man, because he thought it would be inappropriate.
Yeah, he said, respectfully, sir, have White House counsel call the Department of Justice if you have an inquiry. Let's put the backdrop on all this. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein will brief all House members this morning about the controversial firing of FBI Director James Comey. Yesterday, he spoke to the Senate, and his explanation of the timeline of events did not add up or sit well with some Democrats.
He knew that Comey was going to be removed prior to him writing his memos.
Do you believe that the Deputy Attorney General knew before he wrote that memo that James Comey was going to be fired?
Yes.
What was it that he said that led you to believe?
He knew the day before.
Did he indicate he was pressured into writing that memo?
No.
The Washington Post, now sourcing 3 senators, reports that behind closed doors, things grew heated. Democrats pressed Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein on the scope of Mueller's investigation, why Attorney General Jeff Sessions was involved in the firing, and why Sessions is playing a role in choosing Comey's replacement. Then there's the approach of the investigation going forward. Some lawmakers interpreted Rosenstein's brief as saying the investigation had crossed from a counterintelligence probe to a criminal one.
I think the shock to the body is now considered a criminal investigation, and Congress's ability to conduct investigations of all things Russia has been severely limited, probably in an appropriate fashion.
The Attorney General confirmed that it is now a criminal investigation.
I never got to ask my question specifically about that, but the takeaway I have is that everything he said was that you need to treat this investigation as if it may be a criminal investigation.
It seems to me that with all of the various oversight investigations,